Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into this week's edition of my top starts and sits for week 3 of this NFL season. As always, you're going to get my top 2 starts and sits for the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. As a reminder, too, you can use these top starts and sits for your daily lineups. I know I do. You can even use it for your prop bets. For example, last week I took a top start for my quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. Put together a parlay on Underdog, and I was able to hit that. So I think you can utilize this information for more than just your fantasy leagues as well. With that being said, starting off where I always do, the quarterback position, my top start of the week, I am going to go with Joe Burrow against the Commanders on Monday night. When you look at what the Commanders have allowed in the first 2 weeks of the season, they're giving up 227.5 passing yards per game and 7.6 passing yards per play allowed. That's almost a point every time a team goes to the air against them. And then lastly, they have given up 6 passing touchdowns. So I like the chance that we're going to see an explosion out of this Bengals offense on Monday night against this poor Commanders defense. And there's also a chance that T. Higgins does make his season debut. And if he does, that means Burrow has a plethora of weapons to spread the ball to. So I'm looking for a ceiling performance out of Joe on Monday night. My other top start, he is my waiver wire quarterback out of the week. So if you are looking to stream a quarterback, I do like Derek Carr against the Eagles. The Eagles are giving up 242 passing yards per game. They're actually also allowing 7.2 passing yards per play allowed. They've only given up 4 passing touchdowns, but that is still 2 touchdowns a game. So I do like the chance that Derek Carr is going to continue to do what he has done so far in the first 2 weeks. So if you did pick up Derek Carr and you were considering streaming him, he's a guy I would definitely have in my lineups. My top sit of the week, I am going to go with the rookie quarterback, Jayden Daniels, against the Bengals in that Monday night matchup. When you look at what the Bengals have done this season in the first 2 weeks, they've only allowed 128.5 passing yards per game. They're only giving up 4.9 passing yards per play allowed. I mean, we saw what they did to Patrick Mahomes. They limited Patrick Mahomes to just over 150 passing yards. And then they've only given up 2 passing touchdowns, and they have also picked off the quarterback twice in the first 2 weeks. So I feel like Jayden, he does give you a high floor because of his rushing ability. But just because I think the Bengals are going to play them very well on defense, I would look for different options than Daniels in week 3. A quarterback that actually has been very hot to start the first 2 weeks. I think this might be the week you look to avoid him in your lineups. That's Baker Mayfield against the Broncos. In the first 2 weeks of the season, Denver's defense has only given up 128.6 passing yards per game. They're only giving up 5.5 passing yards per play allowed. Just like the Bengals defense, they've only given up 2 passing touchdowns, and they have picked the quarterback off once. So I think we're going to see Baker's fantasy performance kind of come back down. I think this is going to be a low scoring game between Denver and Tampa. So that's why if you maybe wanted to stream Derek Carr over Baker Mayfield this week, I would definitely consider that as well. And then moving into my top running back starts of the week, I am going to go with the easy pick. Right now is DeAndre Swift against the Colts, even though DeAndre has kind of been a letdown in his first 2 weeks. But you can't ignore this matchup that he has against the Colts defense, who have given up 237 rushing yards per game. They're giving up 5.1 rushing yards per play allowed. So you're looking at a half a point you can get from DeAndre Swift every time he touches the ball. They only given up 1 running back touchdowns so far, even though they've been giving up all the yards. But I think DeAndre is going to be able to have a good day on the ground, and I think he's going to get a lot peppered with targets in the running back screen game. Another thing that I do like for DeAndre Swift this week is DeForest Buckner has been placed on IR for the Colts. That's their best player on defense, and he plays on the interior of that defensive line on a defense that has been struggling to defend the run. So I think you're looking for a ceiling performance out of Swift in week 3. Another running back that's kind of been a letdown in the first 2 weeks as far as a fantasy option, I think he's going to finally come on the scene this season, is going to be Zamir White against the Panthers. Panthers are giving up 199.5 rushing yards per game. They're giving up 4.9 rushing yards per play allowed, and they've given up 3 touchdowns to the running back position. Kind of like the Colts, right? They've struggled to defend the run. They lost Derek Brown last week, so they're missing their best defensive player, who happens to be an interior defensive lineman. So I know Zamir has also been a letdown in the first 2 weeks, but I'm looking for him to kind of get his season on track in week 3. My other tops, then moving to my top sits, I am going to go with James Conner against the Lions. Lions are giving up only 76.5 rushing yards per game, only giving up 3.3 rushing yards per play allowed, and only have allowed 1 touchdown to the running back position the first 2 weeks. I think that's because they have struggled to defend the pass. A little spoiler alert for the next section. But yeah, I just think this, James Conner you always want to play him when the matchups are right, and the matchup isn't right for him this week. So if you have a better option than James Conner, I would definitely consider it. My other sits, even though he's been on fire in the first 2 weeks, and obviously he was my running back, he was a start of the week last week, I would consider maybe looking for a different option than J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards against the Steelers defense. Steelers have only allowed 76.5 rushing yards per game, only given up 3.7 rushing yards per play, and there has not been a running back that has scored a touchdown against the Steelers defense this season. So I do feel like definitely Dobbins. I don't know if Edwards is even considered playable right now, because Dobbins has been the hot hand for Los Angeles. But I definitely do feel like Dobbins is a touchdown or bust for you if you end up leaving him inside your lineups in week 3. Moving into the wide receiver position, kind of carrying off of what I said about Derek Carr, I definitely like his receivers this week. Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed against the Eagles. The Eagles have given up 385 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns to the wide receivers in the first 2 weeks. And then, like I said, with Derek Carr, they're giving up that 242 passing yards per game and 7.2 passing yards per play allowed. So I actually feel like this game is going to be a potential shootout game between both these teams, where it might be the first team to 30 wins this game. So I think you're going to see Olave finally score his first touchdown and Rashid Shaheed to get a lot of those yards as well. And what I was kind of talking about in that James Conner section over in the running back portion of this video, I definitely do like the Cardinals receivers, though. I love Marvin Harrison Jr. and then Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch against the Lions, especially if you're putting together a fantasy daily lineup. You might want to consider Michael Wilson or Greg Dortch this week because they'll be cheaper than Marvin Harrison Jr. But going against that Lions, a defense who have given up 446 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns to wide receivers in the first 2 weeks. Again, like I talked about Connor, the Lions defense has been very good against the run, but they have allowed teams to pass on them. And we've seen how this Kyler Murray and this passing attack has looked so far in the first 2 weeks. So I think that's going to continue into week 3 for Arizona. Now, moving into my top sits, I'm going to go ahead and say this. Guys, you're not going to sit these guys. I understand you're going to play them. We're dealing with injuries, right? Cooper Kupp's or Puka Nacua, Deebo Samuel's out. So, yeah, I'm not telling you guys to leave them out of your lineup. So I'm going to go ahead and say this. Just temper your expectations for these my 2 top start sits. So let's just go into it. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin against that Broncos defense. As I already said, I don't really like the Baker Mayfield this week because the Broncos are only allowing those 128.6 passing yards per game and only giving up 5.5 passing yards per play so far in the first 2 weeks. I would imagine Patrick Surtain is probably going to be lined up against Mike Evans, so I think he's going to have limited opportunities on Sunday. And then when you look at what the Denver Broncos have done against wide receivers so far this year, in the first 2 weeks, they've only given up 174 receiving yards, and they have not allowed a wide receiver to score a touchdown this week. So I do think this is a touchdown or bust game if you do decide to have Evans and Godwin in your lineup. And again, I understand season leagues, you probably got to play them because of how many injuries have happened. So just temper your expectations that they might not have a ceiling performance this week. Moving on to my other sits, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle against the Seahawks. I get it. Tyreek Hill was like a number 1 pick in some of the leagues I play in. You're going to play Tyreek Hill. I'm not dumb. Same thing with Jalen Waddle. You're going to probably have to play him because maybe you did lose a Deebo Samuel or a Puka Nacua or a Cooper Kupp. Just temper your expectations that they might not have a ceiling performance against the Seahawks. Obviously, the biggest factor for me is Tua Tagovailoa is out. He's been placed on IR, so there's a new quarterback. Skylar Thompson. Is there going to be chemistry? I kind of actually see Miami, especially game is on the road against Seattle. So I actually see Miami leaning into Devin Achane. We'll see if Mostert's back. Jalen, the rookie running back from Tennessee. Anyways, I just see them leaning into the run, so I can see they're going to be limited targets in the passing attack for Waddle and Hill. And then when you look at what they've done against wide receivers, Seattle's only given up 141 receiving yards and 1 touchdown to wide receivers in the first 2 weeks. So again, seasonal leagues, I get it, guys. You're going to play these guys. Just temper your expectations. If you put together a daily fantasy lineup, I would definitely consider not having these guys in your daily lineups. And then if you do prop bets, maybe you don't bet against them going the over. Maybe you actually bet against them going the under on a prop bet. So moving into my top starts and sits for the tight end position. My top start of the week, I'm going to go with Kyle Pitts against the Chiefs. The Chiefs have been money as far as tight ends. We saw that happened last week when I told you guys to play Mike Gesicki. Going against the Chiefs defense, who have given up 276 receiving yards and a touchdown against tight ends in the first 2 weeks. So I definitely like Kyle Pitts. I see this being a breakout game for him in this season. So if you do have him on your rosters, you've been patient with them, I would definitely have him in your lineups this week. Another one I like, a guy that's always kind of been a boom or bust fantasy tight end over the last 2 weeks. I think he's going to have a ceiling performance. It's going to be George Kittle against the Rams. There is no Deebo Samuel, as I was talking about, in the wide receiver position. Deebo's not playing this week, so that actually, when you look at the splits between with him and Deebo out, Kittle usually has his best games when Deebo's not in the lineup because they're going to utilize him more. And then when you look at what they've allowed against tight ends, they've given up 132 receiving yards and a touchdown to tight ends in the first 2 weeks. Moving into my top sits. My top sit, I am going to go with Dalton Kincaid against the Jaguars. Now, I do the same thing I was saying about in my wide receiver section. Like, in seasonal leagues, you're going to probably play Dalton Kincaid. Like, I have Dalton Kincaid in a league. I'm going to leave him in my lineup. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to temper my expectations that he's probably going to have a floor type of game. If you are putting together a daily lineup or you're doing prop bets on underdog, maybe you just avoid doing anything with Dalton Kincaid this week. The reason why is when you look at what the Jaguars have done against the tight ends so far this year, only 23 receiving yards have been allowed and against tight ends in the first 2 weeks. So again, just temper your expectations this week with Dalton Kincaid. If you have a better option on your bench to play over him, I would definitely consider it. Now, a guy that's been a quality streaming option when the matchup is right. If you're kind of been streaming tight ends, the one tight end I would not stream this week would be Noah Fant against the Dolphins. Dolphins have only given up 38 receiving yards to tight ends this week so far this season. So that's what, 16 and a half. No, my math is 16 and a half. I'm sorry, 19 receiving yards per game when you break that down. My math was totally brutal right there in front of you guys. But yeah, if you were looking for streaming options, Noah Fant's the name you want to avoid this week. So yeah, those are my top starts and sits for week 3 of this NFL season. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you have not subscribed or followed me on all my social media platforms, please do. I'm on X, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. I got a link tree on my X account if you want to go in there and make sure you do follow me. As always, guys, you will get me next Tuesday for my top waiver wires and streamable defenses, so stay tuned for that. I wish you guys the best luck this week. Talk to you soon. Peace out.